Hey everyone, I am making this video because there is a big myth that is going around right now about the recent presidential election here in the States. Now, as you probably know, Donald Trump was just recently elected president. He defeated Hillary Clinton back about just a few weeks ago, about a month and a half now. And there are a lot of liberals who are now going crazy. And they're saying things like, oh, Donald Trump won because of racism. Look at how racist America is. Well, I am here to tell you that racism did not elect Donald Trump. And that may sound strange because there were certainly a lot of things that Donald Trump said and did during the campaign that you could certainly argue exploited racism. But I am arguing that racism was not the main reason why he won. And there's a very quick and dirty proof to show that. And that's just by looking at the map. If you take a look at the map of this year's presidential election, and you compare it with 2008 and 2012, you will see that there were a lot of states that President Obama carried twice that went for Donald Trump this year. In fact, let me just take a moment to list or think of all the Obama states that Trump carried from the last two elections. He got Florida, he got Iowa, he got the one electoral vote from Maine's 2nd Congressional District, he got Michigan, he got Ohio, he got Pennsylvania, and he got Wisconsin. So that's 7 Obama states from the last two elections that Donald Trump carried this year. And now there were 2 states that went for President Obama in 2008 that went to Mitt Romney in 2012. But Donald Trump got both of those states. He carried all the Romney states, which is something that none of us ever expected. None of us ever expected him to win at all. But the real question here is, how did Donald Trump manage to carry so many Obama states? Because if he hadn't, then he wouldn't have won the election. It just doesn't work. And racism can't explain that. Because these were a lot of people who in many cases voted for Barack Obama twice. How can they go from voting for our first black president or our first technically mixed race president, since Obama is part white? How can they go from voting for our first president of color to suddenly becoming racists over the last 4 to 8 years? It just doesn't work that way. So, what I would argue was really the biggest factor that got Donald Trump elected was trade. Opposition to free trade. During the campaign, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were against TPP, but Hillary Clinton didn't really make much of an issue out of it. Donald Trump, on the other hand, mentioned it in just about every speech he gave. He spent the whole campaign attacking trade deals, like he went after NAFTA. In fact, he attacked Hillary over her husband's signing of NAFTA back in the 90s. But most of all, one of his biggest pet issues was stopping the Trans-Pacific Partnership. For whatever reason, a lot of these working class voters feel like free trade has really screwed them over. Things like NAFTA, CAFTA, and now TPP. And Trump basically made that one of the big centerpieces of his campaign. And that is the biggest reason why he won. Of course, you saw later on in the campaign, he threatened to put a 35% tariff on Ford small cars if they moved the manufacturing to Mexico, which is what they were planning to do. And that resonated with a lot of Rust Belt voters. In fact, if you take a look, Trump carried pretty much all the major industrial swing states. He got Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. He got all of them. And that, you can't just explain that by saying those voters are racist, because these are all states that voted for Barack Obama twice. So how can they be racist? And Michael Moore actually was telling people that Trump had a chance to win, that his strength with unions and with blue-collar working-class voters was much better than most of us thought. And he turned out to be right. In fact, I remember watching the election night coverage on CNN and hearing someone, I forget who it was, one of the anchors, say that there were exit polls in some states that had Trump getting over 50% of the union vote. 50%, which is pretty high for a Republican. Most of the time, Republicans, I think, only get about like 30, 35, maybe 40% of the union vote. But anyhow, it's one of those things. And, I was kind of surprised by that, because I figured that even if he did run strong with the union voters, they would be outnumbered by the more wealthy, professional, white-collar suburbanites who would vote for Hillary. And that turned out to be wrong. And the reason I believed that, though, is because of my own knowledge of history, and particularly of American politics. I'm from Michigan, and Michigan, for many years, one of the biggest players in Michigan politics was the United Auto Workers, the UAW. Very big union in Michigan. And when their influence was at its peak, and when their members were the most solidly Democrat, Michigan was actually more Republican then than it is now. And the main reason for that is because you had these somewhat wealthy, white, professional, socially liberal exclaves and suburban regions, places like in Oakland County, for instance, that were solidly Republican at that time. Now, since Bill Clinton came along, and since the 90s, those regions have started to gradually shift more toward the Democrats, primarily because of social issues. Hillary Clinton got Oakland County by a pretty decent margin, but Trump did so remarkably well in the rural areas, in the big manufacturing areas, that he was able to take Michigan. He did much better in the manufacturing areas than I thought. Some of the counties that he carried in Michigan were counties that haven't voted Republican for president since either Reagan or Bush won. Or maybe even Nixon in 72. I don't know. But this was the pattern across all of the big manufacturing states. Trump basically just completely ran the table. One of the big mistakes that Hillary Clinton made was she thought she had that vote in the bag. And by the time she realized she didn't, it was too late. Now, elections are very rarely decided by a single factor, and this election was no exception to that. Hillary's scandals had an effect. Trump's name recognition, certainly. I mean, he was a household name long before he ever ran for president. And just there were other things. But anyway, Donald Trump did not win because of racism. He won because of protectionism. And that's basically the biggest factor that gave Donald Trump this election. Now, before I finish here, I would like to quickly address the issues with the Russian leaks. And unless we find more evidence to the contrary, I really don't think they had that much of an effect. I mean, I have no doubt that Russia was trying to get Donald Trump elected, but, really, most of these leaks were things that the only people who were affected by that were those who were already inclined to think that Hillary Clinton was corrupt. And not all of those were Trump supporters. A lot of those were some of Bernie Sanders' most enthusiastic voters, the Bernie or bust types, who And a lot of these leaks basically proved in their minds the idea that the Democratic Party was somehow rigging the primaries against their candidate. Now, of course, the Russians cherry-picked a lot of these leaks, but that's kind of another issue. And I'll be interested to see what the investigations reveal about this. But those are just my initial thoughts. So, in short, blaming Donald Trump's victory on racism is just very short-sighted. So thank you, and have a good day.